Great. As a reminder to those of you who don't know my name, I'm Jess Kulik. I didn't say that earlier, and I honestly forget because I know so many of you. But now we are going to switch over to our presenter for the day, who is Jo Swanson from Northwoods Volunteer Connection, a nonprofit dedicated to the stewardship of the Superior National Forest. She has a background in nonprofit trail administration and camps over 52 nights a year, which is amazing. So I hope you all enjoy and welcome Jo Swanson.
All right, I think I turned this on. How do I do this? Okay, it's on. All right. And this one.
That one's on.
That one's on? All right. Does it sound like it's on? I don't think it sounds like it's on. Now is it on? Still no? Oh, there we go. There we go. I was too far away. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here. Despite the food situation, I'm grateful that we have some muffins and coffee that everyone can enjoy. I have been hearing about this group since literally my first week on the job, and so to be here is a little bit surreal. I'm really excited to share with you about the work that Northwoods Volunteer Connection does and how important the Superior National Forest is. And I want to start by just acknowledging that the forest that I'm talking about today is on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe people. And I hope that the work that NVC does honors the land and the people who love it. So before I jump in and talk about all of the projects that we've been up to and what's on the agenda for next year, I want to explain a little bit about why I'm in this role and what the Superior National Forest means to me. And maybe I will do that. There we go. I mean, I couldn't deprive you of this picture of very hot pink Jo Swanson in the 90s. The 90s were a time. So I was really lucky to grow up in a very outdoorsy family. We went to a lot of state parks. We hiked the state park trails, only the easy ones. But we would spend a lot of time outside, so many picnics. I loved being outdoorsy. It was a great way to grow up. And I'm just so grateful that I had that experience. But I was a bit of an odd kid. Some would say that that translates into adulthood as well. But I really wanted to do more and more outside. Just going to the state parks wasn't quite enough for me. I wanted to go and basically live in the woods. I wanted to be a backpacker, and I wanted to hike long distances, which is a really weird thing for a third grader to want to do, because my family was not into that at all. They liked to be inside. So as I grew up, I finally had the opportunity to be a backpacker, and I've hiked about 20 different long trails, some of which you may have heard of, like the Ice Age Trail across Wisconsin, and I hiked the Appalachian Trail from Maine down to Georgia, which was exhausting, as you can tell. But the very first trail that I ever hiked was closer to home, and it was the Superior Hiking Trail, 300 miles from the Canadian border to the Wisconsin border, although it was shorter back when I first started hiking it. And this rocky, rooty piece of land was the first place where I ever spent the night in the woods all by myself. And I had no idea what I was doing. If you could make a mistake out in the woods, I made it. My very first backpacking trip, I set off to do 250 miles and I made it 18. Thanks to my parents for bailing me out at Gooseberry Falls. But I learned so much, and I really valued those experiences I had, the good and the bad. And the trail meant so much to me that I wanted to give back to it. And so I became a volunteer for the Superior Hiking Trail Association. And when I started out, I had no idea what any of the tools were. I had no idea the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes and on the ground to make sure that we have infrastructure like trails to go play on. And so I kept coming back and back to these volunteer projects and learning more and more, and became enamored with the cool people I was meeting and the skills I was learning. And I decided that I wanted to make this into a career. And so eventually I ended up working for the Superior Hiking Trail Association for about 7 years. And so my office didn't usually look like this, but on really rare, awesome days, it did look like that. And I worked in a variety of roles. I worked with volunteers, coordinating various like adoption programs where people would adopt a campsite or a section of trail. And I also got to work with land managers. So about 20% of the Superior Hiking Trail is within the Superior National Forest. So that's about 60 miles. And I got to work with those Forest Service personnel to figure out how to take care of certain issues, how to plan for projects that were coming up. And every time that I interacted with those Forest Service staff, I was inspired by them because they truly loved the forest that they were working for. And it made me want to explore more of the Superior National Forest because I was only seeing this very narrow strip of trail. And I knew that there was so much more. But, you know, I was busy, life was happening. I wasn't really prioritizing getting out into the national forest. And then the pandemic happened. And I, like half of Minnesota, decided that now was the time to go out and explore more of our public lands. And I really thrive when I give myself a silly goal. And so I gave myself a silly goal that during the pandemic, I would try to visit all of the Superior National Forest campgrounds, and I would spend a night at each one. And there are over 40. Here's the list. And so for a couple of years, that was what I worked on in my free time, as I would go to these campgrounds and spend a night. And it took me to all these interesting places, little roads that I had no business being on at times with my car. But I went to all these places and spent a night and checked off a whole bunch of boxes. And it was just kind of like this challenge for myself, but it wasn't all that meaningful until one night at Section 29 Lake. And I think that was the night when my mindset changed. So as you can tell by the map, Section 29 Lake is absolutely middle of nowhere. You know, you go to Isabella, you know, very big town, and then you turn onto a dirt road and onto another dirt road until you're on this little one-lane road where if you meet a car, one of you is going to be backing up a long way. So I was a little nervous, but I got there and it was fine. I didn't have to back up a long way. And it's a rustic campground, which means there's a few places to camp, there's an outhouse, and that's it. That's all that's there. And I got there and there was only one other tent set up, which was amazing because, you know, during that time, everywhere was busy all the time, anywhere. It didn't matter where you went, there were people. And so I felt really lucky that there was only one other party set up there. And I got there and I looked at the lake. And at first I was kind of disappointed because part of Section 29 Lake had burned in the 2011 Pagani Creek fire. And there's just something about burned landscapes that creeps me out a little bit. I know that fire is important, but I just can't shake this uneasiness that I feel in burned landscapes sometimes. However, my campsite was pretty excellent. I can't argue with that. I set up my tent and it was full on bug season. So I was getting eaten and I was like, you know, it's beautiful outside, but I'm going to hang out in my tent and read a book. So I got in my tent, and as you can kind of see, my tent has some mesh on the top. You can't see super well, but there's mesh, so I can get good airflow. I can kind of see what's going on. And I was sitting there reading a book, and I heard this loud scuffling noise in the woods. And of course, my brain instantly goes to moose, bear, wolf. And then reality kind of sets in. Oh, it's probably like a fox or a hare. Those are cool too. You know, it doesn't have to be a big mammal in order to be cool. And I looked out of that mesh in my tent. I poked my head up and I didn't see anything. And I was like, okay, well, it was probably nothing. It's gone, whatever. I didn't see it, but it kept going. And then the noise intensified. It wasn't just scuffling in the woods. It was also this weird grating noise, almost like a digging noise coming from a couple different spots outside my tent. And so now I was really curious. So I got out of the tent and I braved the mosquitoes. And I saw that walking through the campground were a couple of turtles. But it wasn't just a couple of turtles. It was a parade of turtles. I stood out there and for an hour, I watched turtle after turtle after turtle, and I no longer cared that the mosquitoes were eating me. That was no longer important. I just watched as these turtles emerged from the woods, walked through the campground. They did not care that I was there, and headed to the lake. Some of them stopped to dig, presumably to bury, to put some eggs in there. I didn't inquire as to what they were doing. I just took a picture, left them on their own. And it was the most incredible experience to stand there and get to see this parade. I'd never seen that many turtles on the move. And I'd seen turtles on logs before sunning themselves, but never had I been to a turtle parade. And it was, I think, what changed for me in that moment was it went from my goal of camping at all these campgrounds went from needing to check off something on a list to what am I going to explore and discover while I'm out there? What am I going to be surprised by? And so I kept going to the different campgrounds and I kept being surprised and finding places that surprised me, like an old farmstead with a big field. It just isn't what you think of when you think of the boreal forest that we live in. I was also surprised by old infrastructure. There's a lot of old infrastructure out there, which I would find all the time in places I didn't expect. I also found natural surprises like the world's most perfect sunbathing rock, which is not too far from here. And I got to know where I could find rare plants and somewhat rare mammals. I drove a lot of little dirt roads and I can now run a Northland safari for friends. If they've never seen a moose, I can't guarantee it, but I haven't failed yet. So my love for the Superior National Forest and the experiences I've had here are special to me, but they aren't really that unique because I'm willing to bet most people in this room have had really impactful experiences in the National Forest, whether it's the animals or the plants that you encountered, the people that you shared that with, the people you met along the way. And I think that everyone deserves to have access to those moments of surprise and wonder that stay with you, that you think of in the dead of winter and you remember that you saw a turtle parade one time. And so the nonprofit organization that I work for is Northwoods Volunteer Connection. And we work to help make those experiences happen for people. We work with the Forest Service to make sure that the recreational infrastructure that exists out there, like trails and campgrounds, remain in good shape. And we work on natural resource stewardship projects like tree planting. We were founded 10 years ago to promote stewardship of the Superior National Forest. And the primary way that we do this is by recruiting volunteers for a wide variety of projects. Sometimes it's a big group, sometimes it's a couple of people. I said we primarily partner with the United States Forest Service, but we also work with other groups. So if there's another nonprofit trail organization, for example, that's working on a big project and they need more hands or more tools or just any kind of support, NVC can step into that role and we can say, yep, we will help you with this trail project. We'll be there. We can lead a crew, tell us what you need, and we'll help out. And of course, we lead projects on our own based on the priorities that the Forest Service sets for us. So they may say, hey, this trail is in really bad need of some help. Can you go take a look at it? And generally, we tend to work on trails that don't already have a group assigned to work on it. If there's already a robust volunteer group that's stewarding a certain area, that's cool. They've got it. We'll kind of focus on the places that fall between the gaps and that need some extra help. So the reason that this work is critical is because, as I'm sure you all know, Superior National Forest is gigantic. It is absolutely huge, and it's a very unique resource. We sometimes, when we live in this area, we can sometimes forget just how big and unique this national forest is. So 24% of Minnesota's lands are public, which is incredible. That includes everything from state parks to the national forest, county lands, even city parks. And the Superior National Forest is over 3 million acres, so it's a huge chunk of that. It's also the largest national forest east of the Mississippi River. We maybe can't compete with those huge national forests out west, but in the east, we've got this. And when we think of the Superior National Forest, we think of water, right? I mean, that's what we're so famous for in this area. We've got the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, which probably many of us have had great adventures in. And we've also got infrastructure outside of the Boundary Waters Wilderness, trail networks, and even canoe routes that just aren't in that federally designated wilderness. And for those who maybe want to see pretty things, but don't have the ability or don't have the desire to go farther out on their own power, there's such a huge network of roads that you can drive where you can see moose and you can see pretty leaves, all these interesting things. But all of that requires that behind the scenes and on the ground work to make sure that it stays there for the next generation. So this is where NVC comes in. In the last 10 years, we've done 112 volunteer projects. We've had over 900 volunteers, many of them who come back time after time, who've contributed over 7,000 volunteer hours. And we're focused on getting the next generation out into the woods as often as possible. So we've had over 270 youth who've come to our projects in the past. Over 168 miles of trail have been improved and maintained. And sometimes those miles of trail are very, very rugged. It feels like you're going 2 or 3 miles for every mile in some places. We've also done some invasive species mitigation and restored 10 acres with native species. And we'll be doing more of that next year. So it's kind of a wide variety that we do, just depending on what the needs are, what the Forest Service is wanting us to tackle and what we have capacity to work on. So this year has kind of been an on-ramp year for us. The organization had a temporary pause due to pandemic-related challenges. And so I was brought on in January and after a couple of year gap. So this is our first year back in action. So we spent a lot of the year working on skills training, making sure that we've got the ability to safely go out into the woods, things like wilderness first aid and tool training, things like that, so that we know that whenever volunteers go out into the woods with NVC, there's someone on site who is safe and knows what they're doing and knows how to take care of any situation that might arise. A lot of the work that we did this year was projects that we were leading ourselves, but then we also were able to offer support to a couple of other organizations this year and help them out. So I'll highlight now my favorite project of the year. I'm not supposed to have favorites, but I have favorites. NVC received a grant from the American Trails Legacy Program. One benefit of being a nonprofit organization separate from the Forest Service is that we're eligible to apply for grants that the Forest Service can't apply for. And so we can bring in funding to help fund our mission and to go out there and do this work. And that's what took us to Moss and South Lake Trail. So you may not be too familiar with this area unless you know the Gunflint Trail, but this red dotted line, that's the Gunflint Trail. And this year we worked on South Lake Trail, which is this yellow line. It starts at the Gunflint Trail, heads up into the Boundary Waters and to, as you might imagine, South Lake. And then Moss Lake Trail splits off of South Lake Trail and heads over to the Caribou Rock Trailhead. Moss Lake Trail is about 3 miles, South Lake Trail 4 or 5, something like that. And these trails hadn't received an abundance of maintenance in a while. They were not doing so hot. They had some structures out there that were unsafe. They had some muddy areas, and there were a couple of places where you couldn't even see the trail. So NVC spent about a week over the course of the summer out there. One of the big things we did was we replaced an old rotting boardwalk. It was kind of squishy when you stepped on it. That's not a good time. So we hauled that out, hauled new boards in, and the new structure could handle the whole volunteer crew. So I think it'll last a while. I think it could handle a moose. As I said, there were some issues with mud and water erosion out there. This is what you want to avoid. You know, trails, the trail's #1 enemy is water. Nothing will damage a trail more than water. And gosh, we sure have a lot of water up here. It's really hard to put in a trail that isn't impacted by all the water that we've got. It can also be really challenging to move a trail, not just because it's a lot of work on the ground, but because there's a whole process you have to go through in order to get permission to move the trail. And that can take well over a year. It's a very complicated process. So whenever possible, it's nice to not have to move a trail. And so what we did was we were able to build up the trail with rock work to kind of build a little pathway to keep hikers out of the mud. And this is also good because when you funnel hikers onto a rock pathway, they're not widening the trail. There's nothing hikers hate more than wet feet. So they'll often, walk around a wet area, and then you end up with a 6 or 8 foot wide mud hole, basically. And then you're kind of stuck with it, and it's really gross. Nobody likes that. So we built some rock paths for people to go on. We also spent a good deal of time deberming the trail. So as trails age, they'll sometimes get cupped, and that traps the water. And so then the water will run down the trail instead of running off the trail. And so what we did was we took cupped trail and we debermed it. So we brought it down. We brought the side of the trail down a bit. So now water will be able to run right off the trail. The sooner you get water off the trail, the healthier it will be. It's a great deal of work, but it has a tremendous impact on the quality of trails. And of course, there were a couple places where we couldn't even see where we were working. It was kind of a year of intense growth. To be fair, we had a whole lot of rain, and everything out there was growing as if it was a jungle. So we had a lot of work to do. Here are those pictures zoomed in. So here's what Moss Lake Trail looked like before the volunteers got there. Cue the Jurassic Park theme. And then here's what it looked like afterwards. You could actually see where the trail went. You could see where the rocks were so you wouldn't trip on them. And, we want people to go to trails like South Lake Trail and Moss Lake Trail, because we all know that there are some trails that are overloved. You drive by a trailhead and it's just slammed with people, and you think, gosh, why is everyone wanting to hike there? On the North Shore, we've got Bean Bear Lake and Oberg Mountain. Here, it's probably Quishawee Falls Trail is probably a really popular one. But there are lots of other trails that offer really good experiences. And if we could divert even 10% of the traffic from those busy, overloved trails to places like this, it would be better for every trail. But if people are seeing this when they get there, they're not going to want to hike it, and they're not going to want to come back. So we want people to be able to have a good, positive experience out there. Because of all the rain we had this year, it was kind of an epic bug season. We all got a few bug bites. It was intense. And yet we seemed to have, all of us, a really good time out there. Nobody quit. So, that was a good thing. And I think the reason we were able to have fun, even despite unseasonably hot weather and despite the intense bugs that we were dealing with, is how meaningful people find the work to be. Working on the land, it really connects you, but not just to the landscape. Volunteering connects you to really cool people who you otherwise might not meet, and friends who you just haven't met yet. You meet such an interesting collection of people out there. Everyone who comes is a character, in a good way. Volunteering also brings you to places that you might not otherwise visit. I had actually never been on Moss Lake Trail before our project this year, and I can't wait to go back. It's spectacular, but I didn't know that before I volunteered out there. Other benefits of volunteering include fantastic lunch spots. It was a pretty hard to beat lunch rock. We kind of had to decide who got that lunch rock. Also, swimming after a hard day of work is the best. 10 out of 10, you cannot beat it. That's the biggest benefit to volunteering in the summer, is the after work swim. NVC also provides free camping on projects for volunteers. Not everyone wants to camp, and that's fine. Sometimes people will drive in and meet us at the trailhead for the day's project, and that's totally okay. But it's also really fun to hang out at the campsite at night, have a campfire if it's allowed, and just hang out with a cool group of people. Volunteering is also a crash course in problem solving. You know, most of us probably have games on our phone where we're trying to like line things up and make things, you know, like little games. But this is real life. Like we're trying to figure out how these rocks can fit together. And it's like a game, but it's like a game when we were kids playing in the mud. This is an excuse to play in the mud again. And it's also really meaningful to leave a place better than you found it. Every time you're hiking a trail or on a portage or wherever you may be, and you see that there's been recent work done, you'll always be thanking the person who did it. When you volunteer, it kind of changes how you see all of that infrastructure. You become more grateful. It's like your eyes change, and you can suddenly see where people have done work, and it's really meaningful. So if any of that sounds good or interesting or fun, then maybe this is a sign to get involved. And next year is going to be a really big year. Like I said, this is our on-ramp year. Next year is going to be huge. So what I'm going to do is kind of give you a preview of what's coming up in 2025. And we're committed to offering a wide variety of projects. We think that the Superior National Forest is stronger and better when people of all ages and abilities are involved in its stewardship. It takes much more than a single village to care for the Superior National Forest. And so I'll be talking about the projects that are coming up, and I'm going to kind of start with the hardest projects and work my way down to the less physically demanding projects and how you can get involved. Next year, we're actually heading back to South Lake Trail because it's 4 or 5 miles long, and we simply cannot get to the northern part in the boundary waters by doing a day trip. We would lose too much time commuting. 5 miles commute in a car, but it's a really bad commute on foot. So we're gonna hike in, set up camp, stay for a few days, work our way up to the very north end of South Lake Trail. There'll be excellent swimming. Stay for a couple days and then hike back. So that'll be pretty physically demanding. We're also going to do day trips into Moss Lake Trail and South Lake Trail that will be over rocky and rooty terrain, you know, kind of normal for the Northwoods. But it won't be with a heavy pack on your back, so it'll be less challenging. People can come for a day or a few days, whatever fits the schedule and the ability. We're hopefully going to be working on an Eagle Mountain Boardwalk project. So Eagle Mountain is the highest point in Minnesota. It's a really popular trail, not just for locals, but also for high pointers. So people from around the country come to Eagle Mountain so they can tag the highest point in Minnesota and check it off their list. They also have a list. But the trail needs some help. As you can see, this is not ideal. And the trail otherwise is a really cool trail. Not every high point in the Midwest is great, and ours is really cool. So we want to make sure that the trail leading to it is also really cool. So we're still working on details for whether or not we can work on this project, but I'm hopeful that we can. In May, we're going to be hosting a couple of tree planting weekends, probably in the Kawishui Ranger District, so probably in roughly this area, maybe Laurentian and LaCroix, but definitely west side of the forest, kind of depending on where the biggest needs are. We're going to be planting some trees, kind of get some regrowth going. Sometimes in campgrounds, the areas get a little trampled because they're really well loved. We're lucky to have those resources, and we're lucky that people are out there enjoying them, but they do get overused at times. So we'll plant some trees and kind of rehabilitate the area a bit. And we'll be doing additional campground cleanups for the rest of this season, going across the forest and going to the campgrounds that need the most help, picking up pieces of garbage, maybe doing some trail clearing on the little trails kind of around the forest, you know, little trails to the latrine or outhouse, whatever in the area needs work. We're also hoping to relaunch a program that we had pre-pandemic. We had an Adopt an Entry Point program. And what this is basically a person would get to pick an entry point to the Boundary Waters, and that would become their entry point for the year. And they would visit a number of times. They would pick up any garbage that they find and make sure that the signs were in good shape. Maybe do some really basic lopping if there were some like branches or brush obscuring signs. It wouldn't be too intense. But when people are going to the Boundary Waters, they're wanting to have that wilderness experience. And that really starts at the entry point. And so if they're at the entry point and someone has left a bag of trash, it kind of sets the wrong tone for going into the Boundary Waters. So we want to relaunch this program and hopefully get a few entry points being taken care of next year. We're also looking to grow our board. So if you're interested in nonprofit work, if you're interested in the Superior National Forest, I have some flyers printed up by the muffins and also on one of the tables back there that kind of explains what our board is and what we're up to and what that commitment would look like. We're a really small organization, and that's actually pretty fun because we can come to consensus really easily. It's a great group. So come consider joining our board. And we also have a number of grants for the work that we're doing next year, and we need to raise matching funds in order to get access to those grants. So if you like the work that we're doing, but being out in the woods isn't your thing, then consider being part of the journey by helping us reach for those matching grants. Here's how you can learn more about Northwoods Volunteer Connection. We've got a website. We're on social media at Min Volunteers, and I will be going to a number of libraries on the west side of the Superior National Forest this winter and next spring, doing this, but with more information about the projects. We'll have actual dates, actual signups at that point. And so I will be going to pretty much every library. If it's in the system, I will be there. And I also have, so I have a number of handouts, like I said, by the muffins. And on the back table, there's a card with my name on it. If you've got any questions, you can ask them now. But if you have a question, tomorrow, you can email me or you can go on our website. There's a form where you can contact us. I'm the only staff person, so if you contact us, it'll come to me. That's handy. But anyway, if anyone has any other questions about NVC or the work that we do, I'd be happy to answer them. I'm just really grateful that you're all here, and thanks for this opportunity.
All right. Get our questions going.
When you clear the vegetation from the trails, what do you do with them?
Ideally, we'll clear it, we'll haul it into the woods. There are times when it's so brushy on either side that we can't do that really well. And so then what we've done is we have cleared like an opening in the forest where we pile it all. Usually it's not so brushy that we can't haul it a few feet off the trail. Ideally, we'd be moving it like 10 or more feet away so that it doesn't continue to encroach.
So you just leave it as compost then?
Yeah, we don't haul it out of the forest. That'd be a lot of work.
Just curious, does Superior National Forest have its own maintenance crews? And assuming yes, but if not, no. But then do you coordinate with them in terms of priority?
Yeah, absolutely. So they have limited staff. They've been impacted by a hiring freeze, and so they do have staff that we work with in the field, and we work with mainly the Forest Service techs, and they are fantastic. Like, they know their stuff, and they've been able to go out with us because I know a lot about trail stuff, but I'm not necessarily qualified to build a boardwalk all by myself. And so like he was out there working with us and helping us. And then sometimes there are jobs where I can handle it and I can lead the crew and it's no big deal. I think the main challenge is just that there's so much Superior National Forest and so few staff. And so, they do everything that they can, but it's way more than they can do all by themselves.
What is your dollar figure you're shooting at to match an And as you go around to the libraries, I think it would be helpful if you have like a fundraising, here we are, here's what we need, kind of a chart. I know that motivates people to contribute.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thanks for that. Thanks for that feedback. So we have received a grant through the National Forest Foundation. It's a matching awards grant. And for that one, we need to raise about $9,000.
Other questions?
So you also work with organizations like the North Country Trail Associations and all these other trail, all the
Yeah.
other trails around here?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they're fantastic. So we'll work together on certain projects if they need additional hands, or if if there's a big project and they just need more people. We would be serving more in a support capacity there rather than leading our own crews, since they kind of have their own infrastructure and they're more set up to do that kind of work, rather than like Moss and South Lake Trail that don't have a group assigned to it. So we kind of focus on the ones that don't have that organization already caring for it. But yeah, I'm hoping to work with the North Country Trail next year on a project. They're a really great group, and I know they've got a lot of trail building to do in this area.
Do you limit yourself to traditional hand tools and no motors, etc.?
Not necessarily. This year, most of our work was outside of the boundary waters, and so we didn't really have that concern. Typically, so far we haven't had to use much motorized stuff at all. I'm crosscut certified, and I'm hoping to actually put those skills into action next year when we do make it into the boundary waters. I'm a huge fan of the traditional tools, but it just depends on the project.
Are there any other questions?
She's getting her steps in today. They're all over.
That's good. I like getting my steps inside.
Okay, I've got a turtle question.
Uh-oh.
Were they all painted turtles, or were there some snapping? And then, anybody who's been out in the spring, they've seen turtles come ashore and lay eggs in the gravel, but I've never heard of a turtle parade. Did you ever talk to like a biologist or anything to see what the heck was going on?
I'm pretty sure they were all painted. At some point, I went back to my campsite and watched from afar because I didn't want to bug them, because it kind of felt like this magical thing was happening and that I didn't belong over there. So I can't say for sure that they were all painted, but they all seem to be about the same age and size and all that. And I haven't talked to anyone about what was actually going on. I think it was just the time of year when they go and lay eggs, and I don't know why that was the place, but that was the place. I don't know. I should learn more about that because it was pretty magical.
Other questions?
How often does your board meet?
We meet once a month online. You don't have to be there in person. We try to get together once a year in person so that we actually know that each other are human. That hasn't happened yet this year, but we're dreaming. Yeah, it's a pretty low-key group. We keep it to an hour-long board meeting business, and it's not meandering.
Any last questions?
Kudos to everyone for sticking through, even though there's no lunch. Way to go, you guys. I understand
Yes.
how important food is.
Thank you so much to our presenter, Joe, and also to everyone for, again, coming and being here through a lack of Tuesday group lunch, and not getting hangry. I will see you all next week, and I hope we all get the chance to see a turtle parade someday.